So when we talk about the question about why the US government, why any government, why the State Department is interested in video games, I think the lineup on the Games for Change Festival really helps explain it. I mean, such an impressive list of different topics um, related to our efforts. I wanted to highlight one quote from the United Nations Environmental Program. And you can see there, obviously, video games, everyone knows it's a huge communications medium. I don't have to explain that to the people in this audience, but I often have to explain that to people I work with. Now, initial thoughts from a lot of people might be, in my line of work, might be, why are we doing video games? And isn't that something kids do in their basement and it's not good? Um, I think quickly, though, once I explain not just the size of the audience out there, not just the people who play games, but all of you who develop games and develop other tools, XR tools and interactive media for a whole host of other uses, you guys get it. And quickly, we get it too here in the government. We understand this is where we need to be. Before I get into that, let me do a quick explanation of who I am. I work in the State Department. I'm a Foreign Service Officer, and I've been working all over around the world, working in what we call public diplomacy. So public diplomacy is essentially the art of diplomacy, except not necessarily with government to government, but with people. I love this first slide photo. I took a picture of this in the island of Maldives, and one of the smaller islands in the island nation of Maldives. Really wonderful local teacher. There's about 100 families that live on this island. The country itself bills itself as one of two countries in the world 100% Muslim. And he just has a passion, this educator there has a passion for new ideas. So when I first went out there, I was on a skateboarding diplomacy thing. And I'm not like, an avid video gamer myself coming into it, but I always look for ways to engage people where they're at. Things that they are interesting, things that can be a little bit silly, but things that are very effective. One of the first things that we did was in that island, we did a skateboarding diplomacy program, as I mentioned. These are all the kids. We helped build a little bit of a skate park. We invited a speaker from the United States who was a part of an organization called Skateistan. They started a skateboarding NGO in Afghanistan and then Cambodia and then South Africa, and working with other organizations around the world right now, giving them guidance. So we brought them in to work with local skateboarders on, translating their love of something fun, maybe a little silly, but building out a civil society NGO to create positive social change. When I was overseas, I often attended a lot of activities where we can meet people where they are. In this case, this was an iftar at an all women's and all girls institution. I brought my daughter there. It was wonderful. I've worked with journalists. These were the people on the screen are journalists who were under significant government harassment, and yet they were brave enough to continue to tell their stories. We would lead events on American culture, on civil rights. This was a film showing that we did. We brought in local activists who are worried about their own country and equality, and we connected the two relationships, our own countries, the United States history with civil rights, with the struggle for equality, with their country's particular situation. This was a program where we brought in young leaders to do environmental, to raise basically understanding of how to do environmental activism, how to spread the word. We went door to door and talked about ways that people could get involved. And, we did fun things always. We did poetry slams. We did gift certificates. That's a little bit about me. I've been in the State Department for 13 years now, at working as a foreign service officer. And the one thing that I have learned about my line of work is, to me, what we do best is we bring people together. We convene people of different backgrounds, but may have similar ideas and similar goals to see if they can work together. Me as a diplomat, I'm not the best person. I'm not the expert on all of those topics I talked about, whether it's video game design to environment program. But we do know people who are good at it, and we know people who are interested in learning more about it, and we get them to the same table, we bring them to the same event, and we get them to work together. So governments themselves are very much aware of the power and influence of video games. And, if we take a look at the closing, and we have the Tokyo Olympics coming up, as everyone knows. Although it's 1 year late, I'm very excited. In the end of 2016 in Rio, you saw the Japanese government, in that time, the then Japanese prime minister, show up at the closing ceremony using his country, Japan's cultural, really potentially its most powerful cultural export in its video games. So he dressed up as Mario. He came out of this big thing that looked like one of those pipes in Super Mario Brothers, and everyone just loved it. And he didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to explain what Japan was. He just got people all excited. And, the idea of video games talking about important international relations issues is also, we've also recognized that. We'd love to see more in that lane. This is an example of the award-winning BBC-funded game. It's more of a narrative game called Syrian Journey. There was a game a few years back called Peacemaker that was like a strategy game, but it also helped promote Israeli-Palestinian peace. In Germany, we've been, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Germany, we've been able to work with them a little bit, but it was their idea. They are doing fun things where they would have local Twitch streamers who play obviously popular games, but the German Foreign Ministry worked with that streamer to connect with a German diplomat to share more about German foreign policy priorities. He speaks to German and non-German people about, their initiative. They play a game together, and they have a chat. So they are going out to reach the audience, not unlike what many people have saw with was Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went on and play Among Us prior to the election last year. It was very well received. And going back to the United Nations, they're working on this Playing for the Planet initiative and doing a really good job of securing commitments from the top video game publishers out there to do a host of things to support environmental awareness, sustainability, from everything from creating content that talks about those things to, on the back end, lowering their emissions and doing their development in a more sustainable way. Go to the next slide. So again, why video games? Why are we doing video games? When I was getting started, I mentioned there was some suspicion, there was some, generous, oh, that's very nice, but this isn't real serious policy. But quickly, when we talk about the size of the audience, the youth engagement of the audience, the topics that we care about, like diversity and inclusion, human rights, social justice, cultural understanding, and promoting real life skills in STEAM and other career opportunities. Those are all what we've been doing for many, many years. Throughout multiple administrations, we've been working on these issues. And they saw that video games has a unique way of reaching those audiences, getting to those audiences, obviously, but also tell a story in a way that allows people to empathize and really understand things in a much deeper way. So they said, yes, go for it, Josh. Figure out what the State Department can do in video games. So one, of course, we want to increase global connection. That's what we've been doing all for many, many years. And we're starting to do that. We're bringing American video game developers, publishers, esports entrepreneurs, ed tech, policymakers, educators, and connecting them with foreign audiences. And then we're bringing them to the United States. We're very excited about our very first group from 20 countries in this Western hemisphere, from Canada down to Argentina. And they're all here right now at the Games for Change Festival. And hopefully on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, you'll also be able to see them. I'll be moderating them in a discussion about how they use it in their country. So if you're interested in how Latin American and some Caribbean and Canadians folks are using video games in their countries, their pipeline, their needs, and their strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion in their countries, please join us for that event. We also care very much about bolstering democratic principles in civil society. And the type of topics that you guys are about to listen to throughout this next week at the Games for Change Festival. There's topics about immigration, education, sustainability, disability access, healthy online behaviors, healthcare, and then of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are all principles of society. And when we talk about promoting civil society, it is promoting and empowering young people around the world to start their own organization, to be advocates and activists themselves. And all of that can be done through the work of video games, through serious game jams, through clubs that we organize for esports and other activities. Increasing nowadays, I think all of you are aware of the challenges of disinformation and misinformation online. And that doesn't exclude the video game space. Well, while there are people who are interested in monitoring what happens in the video game space, including great organization within the private sector of content moderators working together on this. But we're also interested in using the video game platform to help promote media literacy, teach people, what to be careful of, so that we take a proactive approach. We're not just saying, don't use these things. We're saying, when you're on these things, be more critical of what you see. And then finally, we always want to expand access. We're the State Department, for example, is in about a little over 200 embassies and consulates around the world. And we're usually in major cities and capital cities. But how do we don't get a chance to go out to places where, they have a hard time getting to the capital city. And there could be roads issues, but with everybody much more familiar with teaching and learning online and connecting with others online, we hope that this is one way we can continue to expand access to underserved communities. So how do we do all of those things? I've kind of created a template for the State Department and sharing it with other governments around the world about how to do programs that fit into our model, but that address some of those concerns. So we love esports. Oftentimes, even though it's not yet a huge segment of the video game industry, it is what catches people's attention. And so ever since my days working in Sri Lanka, I've always thought there's got to be a way we can connect different communities who really have a long history of fighting each other, distrust, violence. We get them to connect on a regular basis through organized video game competitions, through exchanges like that. In Sri Lanka, for example, there are 3 communities, primary communities. There's the majority Sinhalese Buddhist community. There's the minority Tamil Hindu community, and then there's a Muslim community there. They've often jockeyed for power. The Sinhalese majority, there was a long civil war there that only ended in the late 2000s. It is the country where, for example, the suicide vest was invented with the Tamil Tigers. And then there was a lot of government repression of the Tamils during, before, and even after the Civil War. And so how do we get these communities to connect with each other? We used to do things like once a year, we would bring young people from the Tamil North and the Muslim East and Sinhalese Buddhist South on cricket exchanges. But we could only do that once in a while, maybe once or twice a year. But we did have centers in all 3 of these communities where they can get online and chat with each other. And besides chatting with each other, we thought, why don't we do some video games? And so we can expand upon that model within one country to relationships between multiple countries. And, very excited one of them is a partnership with Games for Change, for example. We also very much care about the developer community, and we are inspired by you guys. The passion that you bring to your work, the knowledge and technical expertise that you've trained yourself, sometimes self-trained yourself. That's amazing. It's inspiring. It's aspirational for a lot of people around the world. They want to know how you got there. But one thing that we are very much interested is, can we leverage some of your skills? Can we borrow some of your skills to create socially meaningful, socially impactful games? So we have game jams that focus on serious games, where we bring in, activists, environmental activists, police reform activists, any number of local issues, and have video games be a medium of helping them get the word out. And then, as I mentioned, the career opportunities that come from it. This is going to be an important skill set for any number of people around the world. I remember hearing the story of the young refugee from South Sudan who created his own game, right? And he's been featured in many places. He was an example of one person from a very disadvantaged background who took his passion. He self-taught himself at a local computer arcade, and his mom saved up money to buy him a computer while in a refugee camp. And he now in the United States, and built a great game, has a career, and is an inspiration to so many around the world. And we hope people around the world can learn from people who are attending here at today's audience, so that they can see, hey, I can build a career here. That's the point about us. We are not in the business of building our own games. The US government, or any foreign government for that matter, when you say we're in the video game space, it does not mean we're all over developing video game. We're all over the creatives, because frankly, we're not creatives like you guys are. What we can do is help connect people. And that's why we think the private-public partnership is so important. Just the last few slides here. So the first, going back to those 3 program designs, esports clubs, we have We partner with organizations that you see on the bottom to reach out to other countries who are interested in setting up esports clubs. We have a rich network here in the United States and in Canada for esports clubs at the secondary level, both in schools and at youth centers like Boys and Girls Club, things like that. And we think that they have a great model to get youth who may not be otherwise engaged in traditional sports, traditional clubs, get them to feel empowered, to get them to feel excited, and learn a real rich academic curriculum that's provided by institutions like the North American Scholastic Esports Federation, for example. And right now we're setting up these clubs all around the world. And our goal is not to manage every club. Our goal is to give other countries a template of how to set it up, work with their educators, their principals, their ministers of education, and saying, now you have the talent, you guys can do it. And hopefully you can have regular connection with these American kids, these kids from other countries and other parts of your own country, and just to, again, promote that connectivity. It's a really fun and natural way for these connections to happen. I mentioned the game jams that we do, and we're building up. We had one in Ukraine. We've had one in Hyderabad. We've had and we're growing these events all around the world. Again, we don't want to be the only people doing it. We lean on excellent organizations like Games for Change, Global Game Jam, and World Learning. They help us organize these events. They help us bring in the experts. And then eventually we connect the local governments, the local schools, the local civil society and NGOs. They say, we love this idea, and we empower them to go forth and start their own. So we can help give them some seed funding, and then they go out forth and do more and more and more and grow this developer community. Eventually, hopefully coming back to forums like Games for Change Festival and sharing what they've learned, what they've developed, and inspiring you guys. And then finally, we always care about the mentorship aspect. So right now we're sending envoys, or speakers, we call them, around the world. Examples, we've in New Zealand, Canada, Croatia, Tunisia. We're working in Tunisia. We sent the developers for iCivics, working with our partners at the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, to recruit them, where they talked about how they developed this games for civics, and they spoke to teachers in Tunisia. We have very distinguished developer, Alan Gershenfeld. He developed Never Alone, for example. He's gone to New Zealand and Canada to talk about telling the stories of indigenous communities. And, we are always very excited about the International Visitor Leadership Program. So some examples, I'll just give you some of the things I've talked about. Armenia, we did a humor and games for social good game jam, where I think the games we were trying to promote environmental recycling programs in Armenia. We brought in civil society to talk about tourism, promoting the economy in Armenia, and just understanding the rich cultural heritage, having Armenians just rediscover their own cultural heritage. So we brought in developers from all across Europe and the United States, and I think from Africa as well, to share what they can do. And then they developed pilot games from this game jam. Our embassy in Mexico is really launching all these esports clubs. During the time of the pandemic, however, they haven't been able to do in-person activities, so they launched a Minecraft competition with a partnership with the North American Scholastic Esports Federation. We've had, I think, I remember 3,000 participants from every state in Mexico and all these different schools. And then they eventually went to the global competition in Wuhan. So very, very fun activities. I mentioned the event in Tunisia with the iCivics developers. One of the reasons I got this position, they said, Josh, why don't you do video games? Was before I started this, I was working in our sports diplomacy division, where we've sent out, basketball, soccer, baseball, disabilities basketball, track, whatever sport overseas. So we decided to do our first esports envoy, and what better country to do it than China. Now, China was a very challenging country for us to do any type of programs, but we understood that we wanted to maintain the connection with the people of China. And what, they love was esports and video games. So we brought in, and basketball as well. So we brought in a star esports professional, Bear the Beast, and he was able to go to many schools, many internet cafes, esports hub centers, talk to journalists, and really spread a lot of goodwill. And, in a continuing very tense time between the United States and China, we wanted to, continue to have really good relationship with the people. And, however the governments decide to proceed, that the people can still be friends. And that's how, esports can work. And then I mentioned in Canada and New Zealand, we've told diverse stories by bringing Alan Gershenfeld, creator of Never Alone, the story of adventure from an Alaskan Native community, and telling them, and this was happening last month, right after Canada was dealing with the grips of all of those Indigenous kids being found in these burial sites across Canada. And it was a very difficult time for the Canadians, especially for the Indigenous communities in Canada. And so this was I think it was a really helpful experience to tell about our own challenges, but some of the ways we've been able to, lift up a local Indigenous community in the United States through video games. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I will have a Q&A. Yeah, we do have a Q&A session at 10:20. And so hopefully I can answer any other questions that you may have. On this screen, you'll see the many different programs that the State Department runs. Most of them you may not be aware of. The United States, the U.S. Ambassador's Funds for Cultural Preservation, for example, and we have a Cultural Antiquities Task Force. We're doing a game jam with them to help, other countries preserve their own cultural antiquities. We have the sports diplomacy. We have Fulbright, tech, all sorts of tech programs. And really, we are looking for experts like yourselves so that you can connect and share what you learn and learn from others through these international exchanges. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to all of you, and very excited to attend the rest of the sessions this week.